I never expected to come home and find a construction crew pouring concrete on my land. But there they were building a massive bridge without my consent. The HOA had always been a thorn in my side with their ridiculous fines and arbitrary rules, but this time they crossed a line they never should have. This wasn't just about an overgrown lawn or the color of my mailbox. This was my private property, and they had the audacity to treat it like their own. They thought I would roll over, accept their arrogance, and let them finish their illegal construction, but what they didn't know was that they had just built their precious bridge on land that was far more valuable than they could ever imagine, and soon they would regret every decision they made. How far would you go if the HOA stole your land right in front of you? Comment below where you are watching from, and let me know what you would do if this happened to you. The wheels of my suitcase crunched against the gravel of my driveway as I stepped out of my car, exhaustion settling in from my long flight back home. I had spent the past 3 weeks on an important business trip overseas, leaving my property under the watchful eye of my security cameras. The plan was simple: wrap up my work abroad, return home to my quiet property, and finally get some rest. But as I turned the corner onto my land, something was catastrophically wrong. My peaceful tree-lined backyard had been torn apart, the familiar stretch of green now interrupted by massive steel beams, towering scaffolding, and a loud, bustling construction site. The sound of jackhammers echoed in the air as workers in bright orange vests maneuvered heavy equipment, pouring concrete into what looked like the foundation of a massive bridge. My stomach twisted as I stepped forward, my exhaustion instantly replaced with a surge of pure rage. Who in the world had authorized this? My property was private, free from any HOA oversight, and yet here they were brazenly ripping it apart as if it belonged to them. Hey, I shouted, storming toward the nearest worker, a man in a yellow hard hat who barely glanced up from his clipboard. Who gave you permission to build this? The worker gave me an indifferent shrug and flipped through a stack of papers. We're just following orders, he said, his voice uninterested. Project was approved by the HOA. All permits are in place. HOA, that one word sent my blood boiling. This is my land, I snapped. Not there. Show me those permits. The worker sighed, as if I was a nuisance, flipping through his paperwork before handing me a copy. My hands clenched as I scanned the document. My name was nowhere on it. Instead, it listed the Homeowners Association as the approving entity. The signature at the bottom wasn't mine, but that of Karen Reynolds, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, who had somehow decided she had the authority to give away my land for a community project. You need to stop this construction immediately, I demanded, but the worker merely gave another shrug. You'll need to take that up with the HOA, he replied. We've already been paid, and the contract is signed. If you got a problem, take it up with them. Before I could argue further, the roar of an excavator starting up behind me sent dust flying into the air, making it clear they had no intention of stopping. Fury boiled inside me as I spun on my heel and marched back toward my house. If the HOA thought they could get away with this, they were sorely mistaken. I barely had time to put my bags down before I was dialing the HOA office. The phone rang twice before an annoyingly familiar voice answered. Willow Creek, Hope, this is Karen Reynolds speaking. Karen, I snapped. Want to explain why the hell there's a construction crew building a bridge on my property? There was a brief silence. Then a small, smug chuckle. Oh, so you finally noticed, she said sweetly, as if we were discussing a minor landscaping change instead of a full-blown violation of my land rights. I was wondering when you'd call. My grip on the phone tightened. This is illegal, Karen. You have no authority over my property. How did this even happen? Oh, but we do, she countered. You see, we sent out multiple notices about this project weeks ago, and you failed to respond. Per HOA bylaws, failure to contest a community development project is considered silent approval. I gritted my teeth. That's ridiculous. I never received any notice. Karen sighed dramatically. Well, we can't control the mail system now, can we? But don't worry, this bridge is going to be a wonderful addition to the community. It'll connect our neighborhood to the main road, raise property values, and provide easier access for pedestrians. It's for the greater good. I clenched my jaw. I don't care about the greater good, Karen. This is my land. You had no right, actually, she said, her tone turning sharper. We do. The HOA has full jurisdiction over all community projects, and we were given the green light by a majority vote, a vote from people who don't own the land. I growled. That's theft, Karen. It's called democracy, she said cheerfully. You should try attending our meetings more often. I was shaking with rage by the time I hung up the phone. Karen had to be lying. I had meticulously read through my property documents before purchasing this land, ensuring that I was exempt from any HOA regulations. There was no way they had the legal power to take my land without my permission. Determined, I grabbed my files and scanned through every document I had, looking for any loophole, any mistake that could have allowed this to happen. But as expected, nothing gave the HOA any authority over my property. They had no legal claim. This was fraud, plain and simple. That evening I stormed into the HOA meeting, every step fueled by pure undiluted fury. The moment I stepped inside, the murmur of voices died down as every board member turned to look at me. Karen sat at the center, her hands neatly folded on the table, a smile playing on her lips as if she had been expecting me. Mr. Carter," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "What a surprise. Decided to finally join us for a meeting." I slammed the construction permit down onto the table, making several board members jump. "Explain this," I demanded. "Explain why you think you have the right to build on my land." Ken let out a small sigh, flipping through the document as if it was the first time she had seen it. "As I said earlier," she began, "the HOA board approved this project unanimously. The bridge is part of a larger infrastructure plan to make our community more connected. It's not your land to give away," I snapped. "And where exactly is my signature?" Karen, she tapped her perfectly manicured nails on the table. "You had 30 days to contest. You didn't because I never got the notice. That's not our fault," she said smoothly. "Perhaps you should update your mailing address." The smugness in her tone was unbearable. The other board members sat quietly, exchanging nervous glances, but unwilling to challenge her. I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to remain composed. "This isn't over," I warned, my voice low. "I don't care what games you think you're playing. That bridge is being built illegally, and I will make sure every single one of you regrets ever thinking you could pull this off." Karen leaned forward, her smile widening. "Oh, Mr. Carter," she purred, "you seem awfully tense. Maybe a nice walk across our brand new bridge will help you relax." My hands clenched into fists as I turned on my heel and stormed out of the meeting room. But as furious as I was, my mind was already spinning with possibilities. Karen had no idea what she had just done. She thought she had backed me into a corner, forced me to accept her decision, and humiliated me in front of the board. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to let her dig her own grave. I had just discovered something far more valuable than the bridge itself. And before this was over, the HOA would be the ones begging for my mercy. I didn't sleep that night. The sheer audacity of the HOA to claim they had legal rights over my land to forge signatures and push a project through without my consent was infuriating enough. But what kept me awake wasn't just my anger. It was the nagging feeling that there was something much bigger going on, something more sinister than just another HOA overreach. The smug way Karen spoke, the way she dismissed my complaints, as if she had already once suggested that she wasn't just making power moves for the sake of control. No, this was something more calculated. So as the clock struck midnight, I sat at my desk buried in stacks of property records, deed papers, and county zoning maps, determined to find out exactly what the HOA was hiding. I combed through everything, looking for any legal loophole, any clause that could have possibly allowed them to even attempt this land grab. But every document I pulled only confirmed what I already knew: my property was not and had never been under HOA jurisdiction. There was no way they had legally acquired the right to construct anything on my land. Yet the construction permits existed, the signatures, albeit fake, were there. Someone had gone through the effort of fabricating an entire paper trail to make it seem legitimate, and that meant only one thing: fraud. By dawn, I had enough evidence to prove at least 3 different violations of state property law, but I needed more. I needed to find out who forged these documents, and more importantly, why. I called my lawyer, David Monroe, a no-nonsense real estate attorney who had dealt with corrupt HOAs before. When I explained the situation, there was a long silence on the phone before he finally spoke. "If what you're saying is true, Carter, this isn't just an overreach. This is felony-level fraud. Send me everything you have. I'll start digging into the county records within the hour." I had scanned every document, every permit, and every map that proved the HOA was operating illegally. But I wasn't going to just sit back and wait for my lawyer to pull county files. I needed answers now. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I went straight to the county zoning office myself. The clerk at the zoning department, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a disinterested expression, barely looked up as I handed her the documents. "I need to check the official zoning status of my property," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the frustration bubbling inside me. She flipped through the papers lazily before punching my address into the system. "Lot 47B, classified as private land, exempt from HOA jurisdiction since 1992. I leaned forward. "Then how Did they get a permit to build a bridge? She frowned, squinting at the screen before. Scrolling through the files according to this, the permit was authorized under an HOA community expansion plan. Says here you signed off on it. My heart pounded in my ears. I never signed anything. She raised an eyebrow, clicking a few more times before turning her monitor toward me. Well, someone did right here. And there it was, my name clear as day on a fraudulent authorization form granting the HOA construction rights. But the problem was I had never even seen this document before. I need to see who submitted this, I said, my voice tight. She pulled up another, her frown deepening. It was pushed through by a third party, a development firm called Silver Lake Holdings. That was the moment everything clicked. The HOA wasn't just flexing their power for the sake of control. They were working with a developer. I pulled out my phone and typed the name into a search bar, and what I found made my blood run cold. Silver Lake Holdings was a real estate development company notorious for working with corrupt HOAs to seize private land. Under the guise of community improvement projects, they would get HOAs to approve infrastructure changes, drive up property values, then swoop in and develop luxury housing projects on stolen land. And the worst part, their CEO was listed as none other than Richard Reynolds, Karen's husband. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. This wasn't just about the bridge. This was a full-blown land grab disguised as an innocent infrastructure project. The HOA had never intended this bridge for the benefit of the community. They were using it to connect to an undeveloped tract of land just beyond my property where a luxury housing project was already being planned. And now, because of the bridge, my property had suddenly become the most valuable piece of real estate in the entire development. I needed more proof. I went to the county records office and requested any recent zoning proposals related to infrastructure projects in my area. Sure enough, buried under layers of paperwork, I found what I was looking for: a blueprint proposal for a high-end residential expansion featuring a direct access route leading straight from the new bridge. They were using my land to make their project viable. Without my property, they couldn't legally complete their housing expansion, and that's why Karen and her husband had forged my signature. They weren't just stealing land, they were turning my backyard into a multi-million-dollar asset. And they thought they could do it right under my nose. By the time I left the zoning office, I had everything I needed to prove fraud, trespassing, and unauthorized land use. But I wasn't going to report them just yet. No, if I played my cards right, I could turn this entire situation to my advantage. I made one more stop before heading home, a visit to a private real estate consultant who specialized in land acquisition deals. If my property was as valuable as I now knew it was, I wanted to know exactly what I could do with it. And that was when I discovered something even more valuable than the bridge itself. My land wasn't just crucial for the HOA's shady development project, it was also part of a highly sought-after corridor the county had been trying to acquire for years to expand public infrastructure. If the county wanted my land and the HOA had just illegally built a multi-million-dollar asset on it, that meant I had all the leverage. I was sitting on a gold mine, and Karen had just handed me the best bargaining chip I could ask for. I left the consultant's office with a plan forming in my mind. I wasn't just going to stop the HOA, I was going to let them keep digging their own grave, let them invest even more into the project, let them believe they had won, and then, when the time was right, I was going to pull the rug out from under them so hard they wouldn't even see it coming. As I drove back to my property, I couldn't help but smile. Karen thought she had outplayed me, but in reality, she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. I knew that if I wanted to completely destroy the HOA's plan, I had to be patient. It wasn't enough to stop them now. I needed to let them invest as much time, money, and effort into this bridge as possible. The deeper they dug, the more evidence they created, and the worse their legal position became. So instead of filing an immediate lawsuit or calling law enforcement, I did something that Karen and her little band of HOA goons would never expect. I let them build. I let them pour their concrete, install their steel reinforcements, and continue expanding the project under the false assumption that they were untouchable. But every single move they made, every decision, every signature, every dollar they spent, it was all being recorded, documented, and archived. I installed high-resolution security cameras around my property, including one with a direct view of the construction site. Every morning at sunrise, I watched as workers trespassed onto my land, as HOA board members strolled in to inspect their grand project, completely unaware that they were walking straight into a legal disaster of their own making. Karen was so confident in her power that she didn't even try to hide what she was doing. At every HOA meeting, she paraded the bridge project around like her personal victory. boasting about how it was going to be the single greatest improvement to our neighborhood and how it would transform our community forever. She even pushed for additional funding to beautify the area around the bridge, landscaping, decorative lighting, and even a small pedestrian park with benches and picnic tables. The HOA board, consisting mostly of her lackey, who were too afraid to question her authority, voted in favor of every single proposal she made. They approved thousands of dollars in additional spending without even hesitating, convinced that they were making an investment in something permanent, something that they would control for decades to come. And while I sat quietly in the back of those meetings, nodding along, taking notes, letting them believe that they had already won, but behind the scenes I was making sure that every illegal action they took would be used against them. I compiled a comprehensive file of evidence, including before and after photos of my property, proving that the bridge was being built on my land without my permission. I gathered copies of every forged document, every fake signature, and every unauthorized permit that Karen and her husband had submitted under false pretenses. I even went as far as hiring a private investigator to dig into Silver L Holdings, the development firm that was secretly funding the bridge. What I found was even worse than I expected. Silver Lake had a history of colluding with corrupt HOAs to seize land under fraudulent conditions, pushing through illegal projects, and then flipping properties for massive profits. The CEO, Richard Reynolds, had been implicated in multiple lawsuits across the state, but thanks to his connections with local officials, none of them had ever stuck with this new information. I began making quiet moves of my own. I reached out to my real estate consultant and began discussions with the county regarding the true value of my land. I learned that because of its location and proximity to planned infrastructure expansions, my property was worth far more than I had initially really said. The county had been eyeing my land for years, but because it wasn't available for sale, they had never been able to make an offer. Now, thanks to the bridge, it had become even more valuable. The irony was almost too perfect. The HOA thought they were building a shortcut for their luxury development, but in reality, they were driving up the price of land that I now had complete leverage over. As the weeks passed, I watched the construction continue at an accelerated pace. Karen, eager to see her pet project completed before anyone could stop her, pushed the workers harder, forcing them to meet impossible deadlines. The bridge's foundation was reinforced, steel railings were installed, and the main structure started taking shape. They even started pouring sidewalks leading up to it, creating a grand entranceway that would allow future homeowners easy access to the main road. HOA funds were pouring into this project faster than ever, and the neighborhood was buzzing with excitement over its completion. But while Karen and her board members were busy celebrating their so-called success, I was ensuring that their financial downfall was set in stone. I worked with my lawyer to begin quietly drafting a lawsuit, one that would not only challenge the legality of the construction, but also hold every single board member personally liable for trespassing, property destruction, and fraud. I also began leaking information about the bridge's true purpose to other homeowners in the neighborhood, people who had been blindly supporting the HOA without realizing that they were being used as pawns in a much larger scheme. The moment they learned that their HOA fees were being funneled into a private development deal that only benefited Karen and her husband, the once loyal community members started to turn against her. The tipping point came when I received a confidential tip from a whistleblower inside Silver Lake Holdings. The message was short but damning. ***, the project is running over budget. They need emergency funds. HOA board is about to raise fees. ***. It was exactly the confirmation I had been waiting for. Karen had overplayed her hand. She had pushed this project so aggressively that it had started to drain the HOA's financial reserves, and now she was about to make her biggest mistake. Yet she was going to raise fees on the entire neighborhood to cover the costs of her fraudulent bridge. I made sure to attend the next HOA meeting, sitting silently in the back as Karen, with her signature arrogance, stood before the homeowners and made the announcement. Due to unforeseen construction costs, she declared the board has voted to implement a slight increase in HOA fees to ensure the successful completion of our new community bridge. Gasps and whispers spread through the crowd. Homeowners who had once cheered for the project were now suddenly concerned. How much of an increase? Someone asked. Karen smiled, acting as if it was nothing, just a modest adjustment. She said a small increase of $150 per household, effective immediately. The room erupted into chaos. Angry voices filled the air As people demanded explanations, "Why are we paying for this?" one man shouted, "Wasn't this supposed to be budgeted already?" Another woman added. Karen's confidence began to falter. "This is a long-term investment in our community," she insisted. "Property values will skyrocket once the project is complete," but she was losing them. People were realizing, perhaps for the first time, that they had been lied to. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, watching the implosion unfold. The time was almost right. Karen had unknowingly set herself up for complete destruction, and all I had to do now was deliver the final blow. The HOA had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on a bridge they didn't own. They had trespassed, they had falsified documents, and now they were trying to squeeze even more money out of homeowners who were beginning to see the truth. The best part, they had no idea what was coming next. In just a few days, I would finally make my move. And when I did, Karen and her entire corrupt HOA would never recover. The tension in the air was suffocating. As I walked into the packed community center for the next HOA meeting, the room was filled with homeowners, most of them still angry from the last meeting where Karen had announced the fee increase to cover her fraudulent bridge project. I could see the unease in their faces, the murmurs between neighbors who were beginning to realize they had been used. But Karen, still basking in the delusion of her success, sat confidently at the head of the table, her smug expression unchanged. She had no idea what was coming. I took a seat near the back, waiting, watching as she called the meeting to order, oblivious to the legal bomb I was about to drop on her entire empire. Karen wasted no time in trying to reassert control. "Before we begin," she announced, "I'd like to thank everyone for their support in making our new community bridge a reality. As you've all seen, construction is ahead of schedule, and in just a few short weeks, we'll be able to enjoy a beautiful, convenient connection that will increase property values for everyone." She beamed, as if she had single-handedly delivered some grand gift to the neighborhood. A few people clapped weakly, but most of the room remained silent. The tension was growing. People weren't as easily fooled anymore. They were starting to question things. That's when I stood up. "Actually, Karen," I said, my voice carrying across the room, making heads turn. "Before you continue patting yourself on the back, I think we need to address something very serious." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she maintained her composure. "Mr. Carter," she said, forcing a tight smile, "if you have a concern, we'd be happy to address it at the appropriate time." I stepped forward. "Oh, I think the appropriate time is now." I pulled out the thick folder I had been preparing for weeks, the one that contained every piece of evidence of her fraud, every forged document, every illegal transaction, and every lie she had told to push this project through. "I've been doing some research," I continued, "and what I found is going to change everything about this bridge you're so proud of." I walked straight to the front of the room and placed my folder on the table. I flipped open the first document and projected it onto the meeting's display screen. "This," I said, pointing to the highlighted sections, "is the official county zoning record from my property. As you can all see, my land has never, let me repeat, never been under HOA jurisdiction. That means Karen and her board never had the legal right to approve construction on my property. The entire bridge project unauthorized, illegal." The room erupted into murmurs, and Karen's smile faltered. I didn't give her a chance to recover. I flipped to the next document, this one showing the forged signature that the HOA had used to push the permits through. "This is the construction permit for the bridge submitted to the county under false pretenses. You'll notice my name here, supposedly granting approval for the project. The problem, I never signed it." A gasp rippled through the crowd. I turned to Karen. "That's fraud." Karen, before she could interrupt, I flipped to the next set of documents, bank records, transaction histories, and the contracts between the HOA and Silver Lake Holdings. "And if you're wondering why this project was pushed through so aggressively, it's because it wasn't just about convenience or property values," I said, my voice sharp. "It was about money. This bridge was never for the homeowners. It was a setup, a backdoor deal between Karen's husband's development firm, Silver Lake Holdings, and this HOA to connect a private luxury housing project. And guess who's been profiting from it?" I pointed to the screen again, showing wire transfers and financial statements. "Karen's husband, Richard Reynolds. He's been using this HOA to funnel money into his company while you've all been paying for it." The room exploded. People stood up, shouting in disbelief, demanding answers. Board members turned to each other, some visibly panicked, others trying to distance themselves from Karen as quickly as possible. "This can't be true." One homeowner yelled, "How could you do this?" Another screamed at Karen. Karen, her face pale, tried to maintain control. "These are baseless accusations," she snapped. "This is a personal attack by someone who has always been difficult. Mr. Carter has been against this project from the start. and now he's fabricating information to sabotage it. I laughed, a cold, humorless sound. Fabricating? That's funny, because I've already sent all of this evidence to my lawyer, who has submitted it to the county prosecutor's office. And you know what else? I leaned forward, letting my next words land like a sledgehammer. The county has officially opened an investigation into this entire operation, and if you think you can talk your way out of fraud, forgery, and financial misconduct, you're in for a rude awakening. Silence fell over the room. Board bears shifted uncomfortably, some of them avoiding Karen's glare. But I wasn't finished. Let me make this very clear, I said, my voice firm. Every single board member who voted for this project is complicit. The HOA illegally seized land, falsified documents, and misuse community funds for personal gain. That means you're all on the hook for this. Unless you act now, you have one chance to distance yourselves from Karen in this fraud before the county comes knocking. I strongly suggest you take it. Karen slammed her hands on the table. You have no authority here, she shouted, her voice cracking. This meeting is over. I shook my head. No, Karen, I said, flipping to one last document. It's over for you. I placed the final piece of evidence on the table, an official cease and desist order from the county halting all construction on the bridge. The county has shut the project down, I said, watching as her last shred of confidence shattered. The bridge is officially condemned. It was built on stolen land, and it's coming down. Karen looked around wildly, but she had lost control. The homeowners, once blindly loyal to her, were now demanding resignations, refunds, and legal action. Board members were backing away, scrambling to disavow any involvement. I watched as Karen's empire collapsed around her carefully constructed web of lies unraveling in real time. And then, just when she thought things couldn't get worse, I hit her with the final blow. Oh, and one last thing, I said, savoring the moment. Since the HOA spent hundreds of thousands of dollars building a bridge on land they don't own, they have no legal claim to it, which means I am free to do whatever I want with it. Karen's eyes widened in horror as she realized what was coming next. And guess what? I smiled. I just sold the land and the bridge with it. The room fell silent. Sold, a homeowner stammered. I nodded to the county. They've been trying to acquire this land for years for public infrastructure, and now, thanks to the HOA's little project, it's worth millions. Karen collapsed back into her chair, defeated. The HOA had funded a multi-million-dollar bridge that they would never be able to use. The homeowners, already furious, realized they had paid into a fund that had gone directly into a doomed project. And as the final realization set in, Karen's reign of terror officially came to an end. As I walked out of the meeting, leaving behind the chaos, I couldn't help but smile. The HOA had tried to steal from me, but in the end they were the ones who had lost everything. And Karen, she had dug her own grave, and I had simply handed her the shovel. The stunned silence in the room lasted all of 3 seconds before chaos erupted. The words I had just spoken still hung in the air, sinking into the minds of every single homeowner and board member who had just realized exactly what had happened. I had sold the land, the bridge, the very thing Karen had paraded around as her grand project. The massive waste of HOA funds was no longer under their control. They had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on a structure that they had no legal right to use. It belonged to the county. Now the reaction was instant. People jumped from their seats, shouting over each other. What do you mean you sold the land? A man near the front yelled, his face turning red. You can't just do that, shouted another. Karen, still pale and frozen in her seat, looked at me like I had just destroyed her entire world, which, to be fair, I let the noise continue for a few more moments, watching the realization dawn on everyone before I raised my hand for silence. Oh, I assure you, I said, my voice calm, controlled, I absolutely can, and I did. The sale was finalized this morning. I reached into my folder and pulled out the official sale documents stamped and certified by the county. I held them up for everyone to see. The county has been trying to purchase this land for years to develop public infrastructure, I continued, in. Thanks to your precious little bridge, the value of my property skyrocketed, so I sold it for millions. Karen shot to her feet, her hands slamming on the table as she finally found her voice. You can't do that, she stammered. That bridge is a community project. The HOA funded it. That means it belongs to us. I turned to her, tilting my head slightly. You really don't understand how property law works, do you? I asked, feigning sympathy. See, you can't build something on land you don't own and then claim ownership. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. I gestured to the homeowners. The money you all paid into this project gone spent on something the HOA never had the legal authority to build. and now the county owns it, which means you have no right to use it. Not now, not ever. A woman in the crowd gasped. You mean we can't use the bridge at all? I nodded. That's correct. It's now under county jurisdiction, which means the HOA and every single person who voted for this disaster of a project just wasted every cent they spent. The backlash hit like a wave. Homeowners turned on Karen instantly. People who had blindly supported her were now furious, screaming about their wasted HOA dues, about the fraud, about how they had been misled. You told us this would raise our property values. Someone shouted at her. You lied to us. Another person screamed. Karen looked around wildly, trying to regain control. Everyone calm down, she yelled, her voice rising above the shouting. This is just a misunderstanding. We'll get a legal team involved. We can fight this. I laughed at that, a sharp, bitter sound that made her flinch. You think you can fight this with what money? Karen, I gestured around the room. Your HOA is already in financial ruin. You drained the reserve fund for this project. You were about to raise fees to cover the extra costs. And now you've lost everything. You're legally blocked from using the bridge. You've spent HOA funds on a structure you have no rights to, and you're about to face multiple lawsuits from these fine people. I turned to the crowd, because let's be honest, how many of you are going to sue this HOA for fraud now that you know the truth? A murmur rippled through the room as the realization hit the homeowners. Might have been angry before, but now they saw a way to get justice. One by one, people started pulling out their phones, whispering to each other, calling lawyers. Karen's face went sheet white. She turned to the rest of the board, but the moment she did, they all started backing away from her. The vice president of the HOA, a balding man named Jeff, who had been one of her most vocal supporters, suddenly wanted nothing to do with her. I didn't know about any of this, he said, shaking his head. You signed the documents, Karen. You pushed this project through. This is all on you. Karen spun back to me, desperation creeping into her expression. You're lying, she hissed. You're just trying to humiliate me. The county wouldn't just take the bridge away from us. They can. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, but they can, I said, holding up another document. Here's the official eviction notice signed by the county, effective immediately. The HOA is barred from accessing the bridge. Any attempt to use, maintain, or alter it will be considered trespassing on government property. I let the words sink in before adding, and since I already gave the county security footage proving the bridge was built on private land without authorization, I'd advise you to tell your contractors to clear out before they start arresting people. Karen opened her mouth to argue, but before she could say anything, her phone rang. She snatched it up, listened for a moment, and then her face drained of all color. I could tell exactly what was happening. Someone from her office had just informed her that the construction crews had been told to leave. The bridge was no longer under HOA control, and there was nothing she could do about it. I watched as the fight drained out of her, her body slumping as the weight of her failure finally hit her. She turned to the crowd, but this time there was no one left on her side. People were shouting for her resignation, demanding refunds, threatening legal action. Her empire had collapsed in a single night, and there was no coming back from it. I let the chaos play out, taking a step back and watching as the board members scrambled to distance themselves as homeowners started organizing a legal case against the HOA. As Karen stood frozen in the center of it, all her career and reputation crumbling around her, I had done exactly what I set out to do. I had let them dig their own grave. And then when the time was right, I had kicked them straight into it. The meeting ended with homeowners demanding an emergency vote to dissolve the HOA entirely. Karen didn't even fight it. She knew it was over. She left without another word, her head down, her phone clutched in her trembling hands. The rest of the board followed soon after, leaving behind a room full of angry people who were finally free from the dictatorship that had ruled their neighborhood for years. As I walked out into tea night, I took one last look at the bridge that had been their downfall, the monument to their greed and arrogance. And then, as if the universe wanted to give me one last moment of poetic justice, I saw something that made me laugh out loud. The county had already put up a sign at the entrance to the bridge, bright and bold for everyone to see. Tall crossing, $5*****. I shook my head, chuckling as I walked away. The same people who had fought so hard for this bridge, who had scammed and lied and stolen to make it happen, would now have to pay every single time they used it. I had won completely, utterly, and without a doubt. And the best part, one was now millions of dollars richer, all thanks to their own greed. The fallout was immediate and devastating for the HOA. The moment I walked out of that chaotic meeting, the neighborhood's homeowners erupted into a frenzy of legal threats, refund demands, and outright rage. People who had blindly supported Karen's regime were now realizing that they had been paying into a corrupt system that had funneled their money into a project they could never even use. That same night, multiple group chats and email chains started circulating, filled with furious homeowners discussing lawsuits, organizing petitions, and calling lawyers to see how much they could individually sue for. By the next morning, I woke up to a storm of social media posts from my neighbors, all slamming the HOA, exposing the details of the fraud, and demanding resignations. It was like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. The same people who once defended Karen, who had sat in those meetings nodding along as she spewed lies, were now calling for her head. Karen, for all her arrogance, had no defense. The financial fraud was undeniable. Every transaction, every dollar funneled into her husband's shady development firm was sitting in plain sight. The homeowners filed a collective lawsuit against the HOA, accusing them of misusing funds, falsifying documents, and gross negligence. And unlike Karen, these people had real legal standing. They had receipts, paper trails, and the sheer numbers to make this a nightmare for her. The lawsuit gained traction almost immediately, and as soon as it did, the board members began to scatter like rats from a sinking ship. The HOA vice president resigned within 2 days, publicly stating that he had no knowledge of Karen's dealings, even though his name was on half the approvals. One by one, the rest of the board members followed suit, each of them desperately trying to distance themselves from the disaster. But it didn't matter. They were all complicit. Their resignations didn't absolve them of liability. Karen, though, was the one hit hardest. The lawsuit triggered a deeper investigation into her finances, and when forensic accountants started digging, they found more than just the fraudulent bridge deal. They uncovered years of financial manipulation, unauthorized transactions, and even HOA funds being used for personal expenses, vacations, home renovations, and in one particularly hilarious instance, a membership to an exclusive country club. The authorities wasted no time in stepping in. Within a month, Karen was officially charged with fraud, misappropriation of funds, and multiple counts of document forgery. The news spread fast, and soon the entire county was talking about the scandalous downfall of the once powerful HOA president. But the most beautiful part of it all, the HOA itself didn't survive the storm. With the lawsuits stacking up and the reserve fund completely drained, the HOA was financially doomed. The homeowners were so furious, so desperate to erase any trace of Karen's rule, that they voted overwhelmingly to dissolve the HOA entirely. The legal process took a few weeks, but eventually it was done. The HOA, the organization that had once dictated every aspect of life in this neighborhood, no longer existed. The ridiculous rules, the constant fines, the invasive inspections, all of it was gone. The homeowners were finally free, and me, I was sitting back watching it all unfold from my brand new beachfront property. The moment my sale to the county was finalized, I wasted no time in getting as far away from HOA-controlled neighborhoods as possible. With my multi-million-dollar payout, I bought a beautiful home right on the coast with a private dock, no HOA, and not a single neighbor who could tell me what color I could paint my house or what kind of mailbox I was allowed to have every morning. I'd wake up to the sound of waves instead of HOA violation notices. Every evening I'd sit on my deck, sipping my drink, knowing that I had not only won, but that I had completely and utterly dismantled the people who had tried to steal from me. But the final nail in the coffin, the one detail that made the entire situation even sweeter, the county had wasted no time in making use of the bridge they had acquired. Instead of tearing it down, they decided to monetize it. Within a few weeks, they installed toll booths at both ends, officially designating it as a paid access crossing, and just like that, the very people who had fought so hard for this bridge, who had paid their dues to fund it, who had blindly followed Karen into this mess, now had to pay a fee every single time they used it. It wasn't much, just $5 per entry, but it was enough to remind them every single day of their mistake. I heard through the grapevine that former HOA members were absolutely furious about the toll, especially since they had no legal grounds to contest it. The county had made sure of that. The best part, Karen's luxury development plan, the one she and her husband had worked so hard to push through, had completely fallen apart without guaranteed access through the bridge. The investors pulled out, the contracts collapsed, and the entire expansion project was dead in the water. Her husband, Richard Reynolds, who had built his career on shady HOA deals, had his company investigated as well. The developers blacklisted him. The lawsuits piled up, and he had to file for bankruptcy just to stay afloat. I never saw Karen again. After that last I heard, she had moved out of the neighborhood in disgrace, her reputation in ruins, her Once loyal followers, now openly despising her. The same people who had once cheered for her now blamed her for everything, and honestly, that was fine by me. I had no interest in ever seeing her face again. I had won completely, utterly, and without a doubt. And so as I sat on my deck watching the sunset over the ocean, I couldn't help but smile. I had turned their greed against them. I had let them build a monument to their arrogance, let them believe they had outplayed me, and then when the time was right, I had pulled the rug out from under them so hard they never recovered. They had tried to steal from me, but in the end they were the ones who lost everything. Never underestimate the power of patience, preparation, and quiet resolve. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud or immediate. It's letting people dig their own grave while you calmly watch with a plan in hand. If you're ever wronged, manipulated, or underestimated, don't waste your energy on anger or chaos. Use your mind. Stay quiet, gather proof, and strike when the time is right. Let your success be the loudest response. Let the truth and the law do the talking for you. And remember, you don't need to fight dirty when the truth is on your side. Just be ready when it's your turn to speak.